The next story from my collection, Tales of the Bizzare and Unnatural, is titled The Cave. It's classified as a short story. Or a flash, I'm not sure which. The Cave. In this day, even a petty criminal like myself pays dearly for his thievery. Once your trial has been swiftly concluded and you've been found guilty, a pair of guards take you through a tunnel to an outdoor area, a huge cement slab strewn with a few weeds growing out of the cracks. Then they fasten the loose chain clamped around each of your ankles to an iron loop that protrudes from the cement, and if you're lucky, all they do is slug you in the gut just before they leave you there. An hour or two later, a helicopter hurtles down and the co-pilot gets out while the rotor is still churning overhead. He unfastens you from your shackles and indicates with a barked command that you are to climb aboard. And once you are seated in the helicopter, the co-pilot secures your hands and ankles to a set of clamps fastened to the seat, obviously designed to transport a prisoner. Before the co-pilot returns to his seat up front, he shoves a pair of ear protectors over your head and looks at you as if to say, "I don't know why we even bother." Then they take you to this place, this insane mine shaft which does double duty as an inescapable prison. They fly in and hover at the edge of my new crib, a cell without bars. They unfasten me from the seat, and the co-pilot once again indicates with a mechanical jerk of his head that I am to disembark. I do so quickly enough, tugging the ear protectors from my head and tossing them on the seat as I scramble out and make a short leap from the door of the hovering helicopter to the hard surface of my featureless accommodations. So that's how I arrived. I've been here close to 4 years, and I've more than doubled the size of my cave, as I began to call it on the very first day. We extract the mineral ore from with the most primitive equipment, a pick and shovel. Then we further pulverize this obsidian-like rock into a coarse gravel using a sledgehammer. Finally, we wheel the material in a cart to the edge of the cave and shovel it carefully into a bin, which in turn is fastened to a vertical conveyor. The bins, which rise in a sort of pulsing, methodical manner, are on the immediate right of the cave's opening. The descending bins, which on occasion contains alternately your meals and excrement, are on the left. This cliff face appears to be a section of a mine shaft of some immense diameter. The only illumination is artificial and quite limited, and therefore disallows a truly unambiguous glimpse of the place in all its magnitude. There is no sunlight, no fresh air, and the smell of pulverized rock pervades each breath you inhale. The authorities saw fit to equip each cave with a closed-circuit television. By the use of computerized holographic imagery, the authorities see to it that you receive a personalized broadcast. You are seduced into thinking that the kind and lovely young woman on the screen is actually speaking to you. The authorities continually change these female images to preclude any unwholesome attachment. They don't want the prisoners to form emotional involvements with these studio starlets. As for a man's private sexual needs, well, the authorities are as always, are guided by their conservative philosophy and have elected not to provide any stimulating footage. One of the first broadcasts I watched described in some detail how the material we prisoners claw away from the walls of our caves is later used in the production of solar panels. A not too subtle irony even the least intellectually robust among us can easily grasp. When I haul a load of this vital mineral to the edge of my cave, I peer out to the entrance, particularly whenever I hear a helicopter bringing in a new catch. The cliff face both descends and ascends at a sheer vertical, but there is a horizontal curvature, so I can see my fellow convicts going about their labors just as I go about mine. On each of their faces, and I'm sure on mine as well, there is a mask of dull submission and resentment. If we do not work, we do not eat. Sometimes I will pause at the cave entrance and look down into the abyss below, where countless other prisoners like me earn their daily bread with long hours of toil, and I think how easy it would be to step into the empty air and plummet through a terrifying delirium toward a quick death. But soon I always step back, considering the unknown depth I would have to fall, and I return without resistance to my solitary life of hard labor. And I thank the gods who rule prisoner and civilian and authority alike that I still have the power to dream and recall the days when I was free. Well, that one was pretty short. I think I'll do another one. The next story is titled The Cyborgs Union Hall. Bit of satire, perhaps a warning. We'll soon find out. All right. The Cyborgs Union Hall. The Cyborgs Union Hall had been constructed in a large part with the use of robotics. Roughly 50 years after computer scientists in the opening decade of the 22nd century had taken up on various web-based forums and scientific journals the very serious matter of just how human-like these extremely specialized type of machines known as cyborgs should appear. And most of the innovators and inventors of this now very familiar device were at partial odds with each other in their ongoing debate. But it turned out that the ordinary consumer had the final say on this issue, since the vote of the shopper is done with either a wallet or a purse. And particularly the female shoppers' purses. Their requirements for a cyborg grew rather specific with a decade or so of the machine's within a decade or so of the machine's inception on the mass market. To be precise, these women would typically want one of the machines to serve as both an ever so loyal maid and babysitter. In the United States, this was particularly the case. For several decades in America, once women had begun to receive equal pay for equal work in most occupations, both she and her husband would leave for their jobs each morning and first drop off their one or two children at a nearby daycare center. Single mothers did this as well, but simply out of necessity. On weekend evenings, the ladies might wish to go out for some perfectly harmless but exciting leisure along the nightclub or bar circuits, regardless of whether they had talked their husbands or boyfriends into accompanying them. And this would often require, again, a babysitter. In other words, they had become accustomed to leaving their children in the trusted attendance of a care provider. And according to most marketing psychologists from the same era, this very attitude enabled the sale of the first cyborg in the crucial but rather trivial role of bathroom attendant during potty training sessions. This onerous task, which most mothers perform with a greater or lesser degree of supervision for each of their children, was then gradually delegated to what would become the babysitter cyborg. Although it became quickly obvious that the machine in question would necessarily have to possess, at the very least, a comforting appearance for both a toddler and small child. So the designers were then confronted with the problem of what you might call an exterior reworking of its face and body. Prior to this, the cyborg's appearance had been decidedly machine-like, a no-frills model, as it were, whose duties had been limited exclusively to housekeeping. But now the company's directors of marketing had instructed the team of robotics developers to provide a more human-like build and physiognomy. What was sufficiently human-like in appearance? What was sufficiently human-like in appearance to satisfy the marketing directors? Well, the directors themselves couldn't really say with any useful degree of specificity nor certainty. They merely insisted on initially seeing a spectrum of models so that they could then acquire some badly needed hands-on experience in dealing with these machines. Following that, they would get back with the developers. So then this team of men and women engineers and computer scientists and mathematicians, a small team of all very unique individuals, began to meet each day in the luncheon room at the company's production facility in order to discuss their ideas, share their designs, and hopefully come to a consensus as to how this spectrum of builds and physiognomies should be constructed. And in the end, they managed to produce a rather arresting display of what might be considered the evolution of the cyborg from a machine to a very convincing physical replica of a human being. They then presented the results of their work to the directors of marketing. The models walked in and quickly situated themselves in what, at a very rapid glance, might have been mistaken for a police lineup. A hush fell over the seminar room. The directors were rather impressed, some even taken aback. No one said a word for close to a minute. Then one of the gentlemen who was among this group of directors said, "Oh, you people have done some good work, some excellent work, in fact. How many transitions do you have altogether?" "About 20, it would seem." 24 to be exact, one of the engineers replied. "Yes, 24, the marketing director mused. 24 transitions, one flowing almost seamlessly into the next. It's rather eerie, really." The cyborg models were then instructed to return to the development lab, and they filed out in lockstep fashion. This was immediately followed by a series of questions from the directors, and a lengthy discussion ensued. Over a period of 1 year, the robotics developers were compelled to attend 4 such meetings altogether. The directors of marketing were fundamentally both shrewd and cautious people, as it was their duty, their job, to instruct the company just how it could most profitably invest the vast wealth at its disposal. But each new product constituted an inherent risk, for they had no foolproof way of knowing just how the paying public, typically quite whimsical in its purchasing behavior and susceptible to most influence up to a point, would react to this labor-saving new machine. Previous labor-saving devices had been welcomed with open arms and open pocketbooks throughout the 20th century, such as washing machines, and electric ovens, and vacuum cleaners. One of that period's last innovations, the personal computer, had become as universally accepted in daily life as had the telephone some 8 or 9 decades earlier. With the advent of the telephone, no longer did anyone need to write letters. With the advent of the computer, no longer did anyone need to step out of their home to buy groceries or Christmas gifts. And nor did they have to use a pen, the keyboard being a far more favored tool. since a mistake was instantly correctable, or the machine itself would perform the correction depending on one's preference. And in fact, its users could abandon the keyboard altogether and merely speak into a microphone, allowing the computer itself to take dictation and type the result all in a single process. And yet, they intuitively feared that the population sector of women in their mid to late 20s, recently endowed with motherhood upon the birth of their first child, might not readily wish to give up that role, even in its minutest part, to a surrogate being, itself possessing no life whatsoever, a being which merely followed instructions to the letter, a Turing machine in the fullest sense of the word. After much discussion among themselves, the directors of marketing reached a decision and then promptly informed the team of developers to proceed with model number 21. Bought only as a single prototype, they insisted, and further went on to add tersely that they were still far from the production phase. On the scale of 1 to 24, Model 21 came close to looking like someone you might see on the street. Yet there had been impressed on this female face an intentional vagueness, one could almost say a lackluster quality. And this so that its owners children could with little difficulty distinguish it from an actual human being. Model number 21 did not seek its eventual christened name, of course. It had no will of its own, but the developers perhaps inevitably gave this human-like figure a name, Beverly. Oddly, the team had selected a name which possessed a vague echo of the name of a doll quite popular among young girls in the 20th century. Perhaps no more than a coincidence or purely intentional, nonetheless Beverly she had become. She became the innocent-looking star of an intense marketing campaign which culminated with a nationally televised gala coming-out party, a marketing campaign far more prolonged and inventive than any car has ever received. Upon the utterance of her name, Beverly would step out of her little room, its door panels studded with stars, and then stand placidly at attention while waiting for the next instruction. Both Beverly and the tasteful and stylish dress that she was wearing were then gazed upon by a nationwide audience of television viewers. Prior to this event, only photographs of this new sensation had ever been publicized. The public had no idea what she even sounded like, and a great amount of talk had arisen in homes, at the workplace, and in cafes and bars as to what her voice might be like. Would she have an accent or sound like a Midwesterner? Would she be a soprano or a contralto? Would she speak quickly or slowly? No one could say, no one knew. The public's reaction to Beverly's first live appearance turned out to be a bit complex. The directors of marketing had hired 1,000 graduate students in sociology from across the country to take documentary evidence of public reaction based on talk they overheard in grocery stores, shopping malls, movie theaters, taverns, and cafes. These findings were compiled and then analyzed. As anticipated, men were primarily both amused and astonished in turns, and typically made a variety of crude jokes pertaining to the usefulness of Beverly as they perceived her usefulness to be. The reaction of the women was far more complex and difficult to interpret. Past the age of 65, this dazzling new innovation was seen as nothing less than an obscenity, demonstrating only the company's Faustian pact with the devil to produce a hideous affront against God. And we should here recall that the fact that Beverly moved about and spoke with almost complete normality, apart from what psychologists might describe as a subtle absence of affect. One could not imagine Beverly doing anything with enthusiasm, with her face always a bland look of steady purpose. Beverly often garnered more favorable opinions from the rest of the female population, however. These women fell into two principal classes, those who had children and those who did not. Women without children tended to be more delighted over the prospect of owning a Beverly. Middle-aged women who happened to have several children, a youngster or two among them, appeared ambivalent, and the young mothers in their 20s were further subdivided by the sociologist into economic classes. Those in the middle class expressed their disfavor, while working class women tended to ask when a Beverly would be available for purchase. These mixed results placed the directors of marketing in a quandary, but in the end a bottom line of sorts was given by a mathematician who specialized in probability and game theory, and his forecast was that the product known as Beverly would enjoy a 0.67 chance of success within the marketplace. Well, those aren't bad odds. 2 out of 3. So, what happens next? We'll find out. Within a year of her debut, a mounting number of Beverlys were seen in public. Having been consigned the role of an au pair girl, she frequently appeared alongside her owner as they went shopping or visited a restaurant for a leisurely meal. In the latter instance, Beverly would sit in her usual state of placid repose, though soon to gently react to any disturbance created by the children in her care. During the same time, the mother of these children would typically engage in a conversation on her cell phone, paying little attention to her offspring, while knowing in the back of her mind that her Beverly would treat their inevitable rambunctiousness with unflappable poise and equanimity. Thus it was that the Beverlys became a common sight almost everywhere you cared to go. By this time, the directors of marketing, having gained considerable confidence in their new product, launched another line. This time, the new Cyborg model was elevated to a 22 and given a male appearance. The tasks which this new device had been programmed to perform included car washing, lawn mowing, and snow shoveling, among several others, all generally regarded as chores that the man of the house would normally engage in. It too turned out to be a great success in the marketplace, and the directors of marketing all received lavish bonuses for their prescient abilities to both discover and then mold a public desire for a new product. As time went by, Beverly and Alex, as the male prototype had been dubbed, became an increasingly common sight nearly everywhere that human beings would wish to go. These domestic labor-saving devices had liberated families from the drudgeries which had once been so familiar to people in the 20th century. Family members were now free of nearly all laborious restraints and demands on their time, and they could at last do whatever they liked without the slightest guilt suffered over having ignored some irksome little task which the cyborgs Beverly and Alex would easily begin to perform upon a simple spoken command. But, as with cars of the 20th century, so too these spectacularly capable machines required annual revision in one minor way or another to help further sales and retain a high pitch of public interest. So, their exterior appearances grew more numerous, their capabilities ever more practical and wide-ranging. But after this, human civilization within all the economically advanced countries of the world began to undergo an unexpected transformation. Since nearly all physical labor of any sort had now been relegated to the cyborgs, self-imposed physical exercise for their owners became even more crucial to healthy living than had been previously perceived as necessary by medical experts. The epidemic of obesity in the United States, once held in check at roughly 1 out of every 4 children and adults, had now climbed to 1 out of 3. Alcoholism had also soared, along with now legal use of marijuana. Cocaine and heroin addiction had also increased markedly. On the other hand, street crime had grown almost non-existent only months after the first police cyborgs had been introduced to all the neighborhoods. These machines had been given the incontrovertible instruction to never cause mortal bodily harm to a human being, but they were allowed to incapacitate troublemakers with a dart containing a powerful drug that would create an instant state of paralysis followed quickly by unconsciousness, which lasted approximately 3 hours. The Cyborgs Union Hall was built at this time in order to house all these machines not owned by private individuals. At first, there had been an outcry from the Cyborgs' human counterparts who had been earning a living as members of the police force, the fire department, and street repair crews. But as it became more and more evident that the work of the Cyborgs was flawlessly performed, both the public and city officials had no choice but to give pink slips to all their former employees in those occupations and replace them on a full-time, 24-hour-a-day basis with a decidedly fewer number of cyborg workers. The Cyborgs required maintenance only once a week in the form of an energy packet replacement, which was also accompanied by a cursory yet complete examination by a technician, a human being in this case. After an initial large investment in this sort of advanced equipment, cities quickly discovered that their budgets shot upward from the red within less than a year's time. There was no going back. But as unemployment rose, grievances and dissatisfactions mounted as well. The men and women now out of work, thanks to the pitiless and flawless performance of the Cyborgs, finally could no longer contain themselves. At first they met in groups of 3 or 4 individuals, forming what later would be denounced by city officials as terrorist cells. In a no-holds-barred effort to recover their livelihoods, these former city employees resorted to nothing less than industrial sabotage of a very shrewd and at first inconspicuous sort. The more savvy among them had managed to fabricate a computer virus, and once these teams of occupational terrorists inoculated the Cyborgs with the viruses, a rather chilling epidemic of dysfunction ensued.